Well, you either hate opera or you love it. I love it. I loved it so much, I took the entire 18 hours of Richard Wagner's Ring of Nibelung and squashed it down to 7 minutes.
Hey guys, George Mesa, Third Eye Edify podcast. I'm taking a deep breath before I begin this discussion, because when I first started this little music mini-series, and if you just saw my most recent short, which is a small diversion from it, a digression if you will, I had mentioned that I had been spending a lot more time than usual between episodes. It's been about a month. It's a really long time for me, actually. I don't usually take that long between episodes. But part 4, which you are now watching of this music miniseries, was intended to be focused on Richard Wagner. Not Richard Wagner, as Bugs Bunny said it, if anyone remembers that Looney Tunes episode. But there were actually more than one opera episode. This very polarizing figure from the 19th century is... it's almost something you can't talk about. We'll get into why. But on the positive side of things, before I get into any of that stuff, he was clearly a genius. And since I've read plenty of 19th century German philosophical books, Nietzsche, Hegel, the list goes on, I'm certain that he was and should be classified as a philosopher as well, for many reasons. And perhaps I'll open with 2 statements from his very, very long essay, as it's called, titled The Artwork of the Future. In one quote I'd like to mention, ... I had visions by day in semi-slumber, in which the keynote, third and dominant, referring to musical chords, seemed to take on a living form and reveal to me their mighty meaning. In music, we only have 12 notes. And for there to be such variety, seemingly endless variety, and there really is. If you look back to one of my episodes in my first music mini-series called Harmonic Deception, I tried to make it very clear that chords, when played to support and played underneath and inside of a melody, can alter the perception of the melody and can actually make the concepts of music more similar from genre to genre, from composer to composer, from rock star to rock star, and pop star. Let's not leave them out. Please see my previous episode for what were clearly the very first 2 rock stars, Liszt and Paganini. Not to be confused with Celine Dion's alternate ego that suddenly appeared a few years ago with those ridiculously strange commercials and clothing line. Let me read another quote from this book, The Artwork of the Future, just to make sure that I say what I want to say before I get into the speaking from the mind. Now, he had discussed 3 forms of art. The dance and the tone and the poem, to exist as one, the 3 sisters of art, so to speak. All genius stuff. I'm not going to get into full detail about this, or this episode would be at least 3.5-4 hours, no question. Only, however, from a like and common impulse of all 3 sister arts can their redemption into the true artwork, and thus this artwork itself, become a possibility. when at last the pride of all three arts in their own self-sufficiency shall break to pieces and pass over into love from one another, when at last each art can only love itself when mirrored in the others, when at last they cease to be dissevered arts, then will they all have power to create the perfect artwork, and their own desistance in this sense is already of itself this artwork, their death immediately its life. Reads a lot like, if any of you have read German philosophy, where 3 pages for an entire paragraph is very common, and run-on sentences are a must, a requirement. I think what's being said here is that art should not be separated into various forms in order to be its most successful, which can be interpreted a number of ways, of course. But in Wagner's case, when discussing his ultimate work, The Ring Cycle, or Der Ring des Nibelungen, I think this is the most clear. He was looking for a term I've mentioned several times on this show over the years. I've mentioned it on being a guest on other shows. Gesamtkunstwerk, the total artwork. This is the concept of, I make all the music. I make up the story from scratch. I make up all the words. It's all me. The costumes, the sets, everything from one mind. Previously, before this magnum, humongous opus, 15 hours approximately over 4 operas, over 4 nights, a festival with a purpose-built opera house that he created himself in order to have surround sound, where you could not see the orchestra. They were sunken underneath the crowd, so the sound would come up way before speakers and technology of amplification, of course. This whole idea of the overweight opera singer wearing Viking horns, this is Wagner. And he did need larger people to be able to sing over larger, lower sounding orchestras, as a matter of fact. There's a tuba that he invented, the Wagner tuba, to create even lower frequencies, making everything louder. Low frequencies are deceptively loud. Even though high pitches sound louder, they're not. And just the beginning of his genius, just the beginning of the taste of what he wanted to do for art, and a continuation of my first episode in this series, where I discussed Der Freischütz, the free shooter, Anton Webern, and this was a return to, in German, Der Volk, which is their word for folk. A return to folk, a return to community, a return to culture, identity. Things that are lacking severely in a lot of parts of the world at this point. Immigration, whatever you want to call it, whatever the reason. This is supposed to be the melting pot right here in the United States. So can't tell me it's the only reason, or that it wasn't done on purpose or manufactured. But the main concept, and what was mentioned in the quote I just read from the book, is love. Love is the guiding factor for all of this. In the story of the ring, the gods are defeated, essentially, and surprised by the power of human love. It's what wins. We'll talk about the ring in a minute. But a few other very interesting things, interesting similarities. Darwin's Origin of the Species was right around the corner. Wagner himself lived from May 22nd, 1813 until February 13th, 1883. And The Ring was written over 26 years while he was exiled from Germany, from essentially 1848 to 1874. That's more than 26 years, but it's It was a very, very, very long time. Oh, I'm sorry. It's exactly 26 years. So think about that. 26 years to create a 4-part opera, 4 separate operas that add up to one story that is one humongous performance of approximately 15 hours. That is already worth a standing ovation, even if it sucks. And you know it doesn't. It's not for everybody. But the story itself is quite profound. And interestingly, combines Nordic mythology with concepts of Greek mythology because he was all about Greek art. And then he turned it into his own story. And you may have noticed that it's called the Ring Cycle. It is about a ring. So I'm sure that's piqued one or two of your thoughts immediately. Let's get back to that in a moment, though. Darwin was around at this time. He was about to discuss evolution. And in the artwork of the future, the term evolution is used. This is 1849. This is before that. The term was being floated around, I think, and we were almost ready to receive it because it wasn't a thing yet. I want everyone to keep that in mind as I go into deeper levels of things on this show. And I want to mention right now that the reason I took a deep breath at the beginning of this episode is because this level of research here that I'm doing in Northern European studies of the 19th century, leading into the 20th century, a very dark time for most people, all people, I would say, except bankers, of course. They did great. Good job, guys. It has produced the type of information I've been looking to hopefully avoid, and it has not avoided me. It has come to light in full force. And it's difficult for me to say everything I want to say without worrying about where I post it. That's how deep this goes. This study of music and its attachment to culture, the guiding hand of culture, may indeed be music and art in general, particularly music, in my opinion. I think it's that important. And I also think the angles I'm going to produce in this episode aren't really discussed at all. And there's a really good reason for that. I have a degree in music. Means nothing, of course. I can prove it, of course, with my own musicality and abilities, but that's not important. What's important in this topic is that we're very busy lately, not necessarily shunning, but at least downplaying these, posh degrees, because when questioned, people seem to be merely regurgitating at most of the time things that they were taught. Now, you want to learn from what you're taught, but then you want to take it further. The degree is where most people stop. The things I was told about Wagner, they're different than what I've come to see myself after reading his work. Not the music, but his essays. One of them in particular I will say for the end of this episode. And this is a side note that I wrote in case I wanted to say it. I'll just mention it. There's another piece of his that's extremely popular called Tristan und Isolde. There's a chord used in a different way than it normally is, and it's called the Tristan chord. This piece was released in 1859. Origin of the Species also came out that year. Interesting that piece has been properly analyzed, correctly analyzed as one long, very passionate, almost holding back of emotions until finally a musical erection and subsequent orgasm is placed in the music. This is the power of the music. This is the genius behind it. Wagner, based on the title of his work alone, the artwork of the future, was actually looking to the future. What has already been done? What can I do to push it further? How much further can music go? with only these 12 little notes. You would need your own opera house and your own instruments to find out, wouldn't you? And he did. So, but in this artwork of the future also, our great Redeemer and well-doer, necessity's vicegerent in the flesh, the folk will no longer be a severed and peculiar class. For in this artwork we shall be one heralds and supporters of necessity, knowers of the unconscious, willers of the unwillful, betokeners of nature, blissful men. My opinion overall, this being the antithesis to the then advent of luxury, the insatiable and unnecessary need. Something I mentioned very, very directly in my own book without even knowing I was about to read something else that had just as much to say about luxury. World War U. And incredibly enough, here it is again. No coincidence. The satisfaction of luxury for one is directly to the impoverishment of another, is paraphrasing one of his own quotes. And as Wagner said, thus, the luxury of the rich is built upon the penury of the poor, as he was very, very aware of the luxury that was taking over his own culture in Germany, the level of usury that was entering and making things difficult for people down the line. See A Christmas Carol. So he also named it the parasitic growth of culture, as a matter of fact. The machine versus the artwork. In his mind, egoism was the opposite of communism. Whether communism good or not is not important, and I'm not even here to discuss any of that whatsoever. My mind's not changed on anything. I just had more revealing reads in the past few weeks than I have in a very long time. There was also something at this point called the War of the Romantics. Conservative circle, founded by Mendelssohn, Jewish composer Mendelssohn, and several other very prominent figures, Johannes Brahms, and so on. And then there were the radical progressives, Liszt, Wagner. So there was already this almost political climate in music at this point. Media was getting heavy. Newspapers were everywhere. And people knew about this. You didn't just have to be educated. It was becoming common knowledge about what was going on with music at this time. It was taking two paths, a conservative and a radical one. The radical one was looking to push it to the next level. The conservative one was very happy with where it was. A teacher once asked me in music college, how do you feel about modern pop music? And I said immediately, we were having cake. I think it was the last day of the year or something. It was just being casual. We were having cake. And chocolate cake, if I remember correctly. I bet it was German chocolate cake because we study so much German music. And I said it's exactly as it was in the time period we had just studied. We had just studied the 17th and 18th century. And it was clear that amongst the greats there were nothing but copycats. And this is something that is mentioned in Wagner's work, The Artwork of the Future, where many people are getting very good at the rules, but they don't understand how to use their own ethos, their own folk. They can't tap into their own culture, their own selves, to be able to create with it. They're simply good at regurgitating. Anyone can mathematically reproduce the music of Bach, the music of Beethoven. This is doable. It doesn't mean that it's going to be good or that it's going to be even worth doing, because it may just be very identical to something else. This is modern pop music to me, especially when most of them don't write their own songs. So Wagner, there's something interesting also, by the way. Wagner mentions who else had their own theater. This would be none other than Shakespeare, who had the Globe Theater, hint, hint. And he had his, the King's Men, they were called. It was a fellowship. Wagner mentions fellowships. It was called a home theater. Shakespeare had his home theater, and Wagner had his home theater. Bayreuth is where it's located, his opera house. And Burned and rebuilt, by the way, Shakespeare's. Very, very unsurprising, I hope, to most of you listeners. I want you to think about this for a second, because there was a cultural phenomenon in the 20th century called the Lord of the Rings, which of course is Saturn. But Tolkien, obviously another genius in a certain respect, created a whole language that he can recite poetry in, drew perfect art to represent the proportions and the ideas in his long story about a ring that was taken. People kill each other for it. It has magical powers, and it is returned to whence it came in order to end the vicious cycle. And isn't there a Palantir? Isn't Palantir becoming quite a headline in the news? It's another story. Hopefully I'm wrong. Now, in the previous century, we've got Wagner, who creates The Ring, an entire humongous story about Odin, who's called Wotan, about 7 dwarves, one of them named Albericht, looking for love in all the wrong places, find the Rhine, as in the great river that's in Germany. And the Rhine maidens tell this dwarf, who has bad intentions, of the Rhine gold. And that if someone were to make a ring from this gold, that they could essentially have whatever they want in life. The ring is made, and he pushes his dwarves to make it. Take a look at this image. I'll give you an idea here. Albericht actually representing capitalism and forcing people into work for his own purposes. Here he is, grabbing the gold from the Rhine maidens below. This is the beginning of a very, 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 very long story about gods and humans, a giant ash tree, a kingdom built by giants, and eventually Valhalla. And then, of course, what would come next? The death of essentially all of them. All of the gods, by the way. Ragnarok. Ragnarok happens. And the only reason the humans come out on top on the other side is because of love. The ring finds its way back, and the dust settles. Plenty more to mention, obviously. But does this ring any bells for anybody? Tolkien said he was not influenced by the ring cycle. I have a feeling there's a very, very, very specific reason for such an obvious lie. There's no way at all that any of this is not remotely inspiring towards the story of the ring. The Lord of the Rings, that is. Is there even a world that could exist where this extremely influential and popular concept of the ring cycle, this opera, less than 100 years later, would find its way into another genius's hands and turn it into his own story? Do you think for even a second that's even possible? I don't. And I see the ring, Wagner's ring, being very quietly placed in all kinds of stories. Even, you want to get nerdy, like the most recent God of War, or the one right before it, because the newest one was called Ragnarok. But the first 3 God of War games in the early, PlayStation 2 era, they were about Greek mythology, gods of war, right? Then new vision for the game comes out, and it's Nordic mythology mixed with Greek. It's very interesting how similar that is to this idea here, in my opinion. And that's just a small smattering of information to come for that. It's everywhere. You can't avoid this. Everyone knows the Rite of the Valkyries. I won't even sing it so I don't get freaking copyrights. But that's a tiny little portion of a very, very, very long cycle of operas. And keep this in mind too, music still was not accompanying movies yet, but it was about to. And the influence is beyond compare. The idea of a leitmotif, where there's a certain jingle, so to speak, that represents a character or a mood or a scene, and then it's used to bring back the ideas of that. It's pervaded in music since. It's in all TV shows you can possibly think of. Just think of the Imperial March, even for Star Wars. When you hear that, it means something that you know. You kind of assume you know what's about to happen, and it's probably not good, right? So these are ideas that have transcended the art forms of the future, just like he intended, just like he had the vision for. Now, I am going to be as careful as possible with the rest of this episode, because what I thought this was going to be about, and keep in mind, this music miniseries is titled "There's Something About Germany." I was told over and over again that Der Freischütz from episode 1 and Wagner himself are essentially completely responsible for Nazi Germany. That's what I was told. I'm not sure if I can air the rest of this episode now. So I'll finish it. And if you're lucky enough to see it, then you see it. If you don't, I have to put it somewhere that it's sitting behind a paywall so I know that it doesn't get into the wrong hands. I'm really worried about this. I really am. Tell me if I'm ridiculous for saying this. This is a very worrisome topic, especially nowadays, especially with the new releases, musical release that some of you may or may not know that happened basically today. So what I was specifically told, and what was now being regurgitated to me through mainstream media, Britannica, BBC, Time, all these other ones, right? Time, who had Hitler on the cover of their magazine, is that Wagner was staunchly anti-Semitic and was a hateful, awful person. But boy, do we love everything he's ever done for the art form, because I studied plenty of Wagner near the end of the school terms, music college, that is. It was just beat into me over and over again. And I, of course, wasn't that way, and I was against the concept of racism and any facet. Do I have this book here? Let's see. Look, I took an entire class called Jewish Music History. I took an entire class for this, right? It's historical development. Coincidentally, there is a little essay from Wagner that he wrote with a pseudonym because he was already unable to respond to what was coming his way, this backlash of sorts, publicly, politically, and within his own music community as well. He wrote something called Judaism in Music, or maybe Jewishness in Music. It's hard to know what the translation really is. He wrote it under the pseudonym K. Friegedank, which means free thought or peace, thanks. So I had not known that he wrote that. It's not a piece of music. It's something that he wrote to an important madam, as he calls her, from Poland. And he was doing his best to defend his name and defend his honor, because he had to leave. He wasn't even in Germany at this point. And most of the ring was written him exiled and not in Germany. France, Russia, London, Switzerland. He went to a lot of different places, as a matter of fact. He was writing about how he was being attacked, and the primary source of it came from people either identifying as, or pretending to be, or pretending to not be Jewish. And I already discussed the fact that Jewish people were already in Germany in Martin Luther's time. Please do see episode 1 of this miniseries if you haven't already. Watch the whole thing if you haven't already. I have a feeling it will help this conversation make a little more sense contextually. So he was discussing how, first of all, when he first penned this, it was published by somebody who was a faculty member at a college in Leipzig, I believe. And that person never gave up Wagner's identity, even though people were suspecting it was him. Then he claims that a lot of the faculty was being absorbed by members who were Jewish, and that they eventually turned the hand against the person who kept his identity, and they got rid of him, and they were doing their best to, as they were infiltrating the media and infiltrating different facets of their culture, able to essentially kick him out for not playing ball, and he had no recourse whatsoever, any ability to speak against it. His main argument wasn't so much of him crying, I'm sad I had to leave Germany, which, I mean, who wouldn't be? He was free to say that. But he was more about how more and more Jewish people were coming into his community, and many of them brought with them the feeling to him as if they didn't have an identity. They didn't have their own language. They did, but then they were kind of combining it with German, which is Yiddish, right? And that they didn't bring their own art. They didn't have any sense of folk. They didn't have the love for their society that he would, having grown up there. And that they were just bringing a lot of usury and paper notes and debt. Now, I'm just saying what he said, okay? I need to say that, obviously, right? Because I was also told many times over that Hitler loved Wagner so much and that it inspired him. Of course, what that turns into in the mainstream is that it inspired Nazi Germany, because Hitler played the Flight of the Valkyries, which is, in the ring, from the ring, that he played that in some of his, wartime videos. And that he was trying to use that to become this like national character, the sound of the national character. Even though Beethoven had already pretty much taken that spot, in my opinion, and most other people's opinions. But the propaganda videos that were being shown used Wagner. Now, as I said, Wagner had a opera built for him, an opera house built from this whole thing, because he had the awesome help of, and I say awesome as in magnitude-wise, humongous, awesome amounts of money given to him by a very important and caring benefactor who basically ran dry his assets. I can't help but think that these trees in the front look like it's a miniature. I can't help it. I know this exists, but this looks like a miniature to me, and I have a good eye for miniatures, It's just the camera. It's the way the camera looks. Anyway, this is Bayreuth. This is the opera house where the festival takes place, and it still takes place, by the way. This festival still takes place every year. And the Wagnerites come out to see the ring, because you're barely ever going to see the ring anywhere else. But famously, and I want to mention that the person I'm about to show, speaking of polarizing figures, the person I'm about to show was born April 20th, 1889. Wagner died 6 years before this, 6 years and 2 months before this. But here is another picture of that same opera house in the 20th century with one of the most well-known figures in all of history in general, possibly for all the wrong reasons, or simply for mostly negative reasons. Adolf Hitler is seen in this window right here. I'm sure you can see which person I'm talking about. That is Hitler at this opera house, ready to see Wagner's music. Wagner's family has kept the opera house going, of course. This is where the points of contention come in on the very extreme level. Hitler liked Wagner. They never even met, of course, because he died before Hitler was born. But to say that Wagner is an inspiration, duh. How could he not be? How could he not be? Everything I'm reading in this book and the desperation with which he writes in the other one that I had mentioned, Judaism and Music, the desperation which he tries to prove the point that where are the Jewish composers? There's Mendelssohn, sure, but where is all the Jewish music to be documented? Where is the Jewish art? Where is the Jewish language? This is where he was coming from. And I imagine it was simply because they were doing their best and doing a very good job of taking over positions of high political importance, media, and a newspaper, obviously, and their schools. So if that were the case, and if everyone was so hush-hush about it, why wouldn't he be frustrated, right? I think you would be frustrated too, no matter, it doesn't have to be Jewish people. It could be anybody. It doesn't have to be that. It's just, that's what this is. That's what we're discussing here. And we all know what happened many years later in the 20th century. We know what happened. And we know how difficult it is to say anything about it without getting the negative, spin. I'm trying to avoid it at all costs here. Desperately, as you can see. Wagner was in France. He was in London. And he was curious as to why everyone was so openly happy about it there. Because it wasn't just in Germany. There were Jews in all of these countries. And they were taking over positions of high power, politically, in the media, in the schools. And he was so curious as why is it from my homeland that we're so upset and against it when we want German people there, which is fair. I'm not going to say that's not fair. Give me a break. France and London, everything's great. Russia, they're not so happy about it either. Switzerland, neutral? I haven't researched enough to say. But very, very curious that the slander towards him began, as far as he's saying, as far as I can tell, in the research that I've personally done. Because when I watch people talk about these books, it seems like they didn't read them, which is extremely common for your typical YouTube documentary. I hope that you find my work to be completely different, and I do my best to keep that as a reality. I wrote, when I first made a little banner for myself, a quest for truth no matter where it takes us. That's where we are at this exact point. This is where it has taken me. It has taken me to discover that people were upset. That in Germans were upset that a lot of Jewish people were taking over all of their schools, their newspapers, and their political points of power, and providing plenty of debt, usury. And that they were hiding their identities, that a lot of them were pretending to not be Jewish, or that some people who weren't were pretending to be Jewish. This all sounds very familiar. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, it seems like, and I'm just coming from a musical perspective here only. Think about how many pop stars have their songs written for them. And there's very typically, and this is historic, you can go look it up yourself. I am not trying to inject anything that isn't reality here. You get 4, 5 names attached to who wrote the song. And they're typically Jewish names. This is either a humongous result of, hard work and nothing but success, or it means that they, much like whoever runs banks, seem to run the music industry. The one that we get on the surface level. The one that they want everyone to ingest at the highest amounts of levels. And right at the beginning of this Judaism and Music book, Wagner immediately mentions Rothschild. This is 1850. He immediately mentions Rothschild, as some people see him as the king of the Jews. And Wagner says, perhaps he's merely the Jew of the kings. Interesting to say that, because how many of us, whatever you want to call it, I'm not even going to use the CT thing. Maybe I'll say it. Conspiracy theorists, they tend to approach the Rothschild thing as obviously this is one thing that no one's going to argue with me about. Look at what they've done. Look at all the things their names are attached to. Go ahead. I agree completely, by the way. Most people I know are in debt. And sure, it's avoidable and you're an idiot, right? But it's not that. I was I have school loan. I've already paid enough to pay it off. And the agreement was made, sure. But a lot's changed. And I'd never had enough of a bundle to pay it all off. And then the interest is just there. I mean, what are you going to do? I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying that I'm also part of the list. Yeah. So this is extremely difficult to discuss, but I hope it maybe gets people interested in checking it out, because here's a philosopher whose work has hardly ever seen the written works, not the music, the written works. I have never heard anyone mention it until extremely recently. I just happened upon the fact that this existed. And I bought it about 2 years ago, and I didn't read it until very recently. I read and reread it because there's a lot in there. And again, love is the word. Love and unity of culture. He wasn't attacking anyone in the Judaism and music book. He was asking, where is the Jewish art? Where is it? Show it to me, please. I want to see. All he cares about is seeing who does what art. He wants to see the folk in everything. He wants to find it, so to speak, so he can find his own inspiration and or see what he likes and doesn't like. He said he didn't like lots of things. He said he hated Italian opera. He said it was boisterous and, too flamboyant, too much. That's funny having him say that, knowing what The Ring is like. But I understand what he meant. I think what he meant was, again, conservative circle versus the radical progressives in this more of the romantics, musically speaking. He found them potentially to be too conservative and too pushing the same thing. And I don't necessarily agree, but I understand what he's saying. And overall, I get it. Certain sections of an Italian opera from this time period, you won't know where it's from. You hear Wagner, it's not old. It's newer. There's no question. And just listen to I would say, if anything, Ring Cycle. Listen to the opening. Listen to the overture for Rheingold. It's not very long. I think it's pretty beautiful. Listen to the overture for Tristan und Isolde. It's a sweeping, tricky, slippery, engaging listen. It's not like anything. If you have no idea about any of this stuff, I do suggest go checking it out. It's like nothing you've ever heard. I'm not saying he's the best of anything, but I know that he really did help music move forward, and that he helped people find confidence in being able to do everything themselves. Whether it takes 26 years or not, that's a whole different story, obviously. But he was dedicated to this, and the kind of dedication it takes to make the Ring Cycle from scratch. I don't see a lot of I really don't see a lot of it. Nowadays, somebody has a budget for a music video, it looks like they put a lot of work into something. Not typically, in my opinion. I've actually worked on music videos. I would say overall, as far as geniuses go, he qualifies. He had his feelings. So did Martin Luther, as I had revealed in the first episode in this miniseries. I don't think Lutheranism is seen as this evil negative thing. Is it? Am I wrong? I don't know. Am I wrong? I'm asking. I really don't know. So try to, understand that I feel extremely compelled, and to incorrectly paraphrase Martin Luther, to bring it up to the parlance of our times, to quote the dude, I alone am not wise, merely driven to press record. This I had to record this episode. And I set myself up for it by saying I was going to for the past 3 episodes, saying that Wagner's next, because when I went to Der Freischütz, Wagner was the goal to get to there. He clearly admired what had happened with that opera. It was the beginning of Germany having their own art form again, their own culture to bank off of. As the Romantic era came into view, we started to see more of the folk entering the sound. Now, Wagner has so many unique interpretations on sound in general that some things may sound unrecognizable because they're so different from the norm. But it's all in the art of storytelling. And much like I had said at the beginning when I read the quote, it's like when they all die, technically speaking, and they all become one, so be it. And the next music episode, the next one in this miniseries, will be about, the next guy. I can't even think straight right now. I'm sorry. But somebody who found inspiration from Nietzsche, as a matter of fact. And I think you'll find, I might even have it right here. Hold on. Thus spoke Zarathustra. The quintessential read for anyone that wants to see why he's being credited with saying God is dead. I think what he was trying to say is that the advent of Wissenschaft, or science, is making it so that people don't think that they need God. See Elon Musk for more on that. And I've said what I've had to say about him enough. I might have to do another episode about him, but it's too modern-ish. Seems like a waste of time at this point. But if you're new to my work, I suggest at least checking out the rest of this music miniseries. And I've said a lot of stuff. It's been, it's almost been 3 years, I think, which is really something to say. I can't believe it. And hopefully I'll have on my very first guest, Spiro Jin, on again for my 3-year anniversary, but I'll at least have my wife on again soon, too. I have a lot to talk about. I might have hinted at it without meaning to in the previous episode, the short that I just released. So you get nothing for a month and you get 2 episodes that are nearly back to back. So there you go. That's how we roll here. I can't guarantee a strict consistency of once a week all the time, especially when I want to make sure that I say what I want to say the right way. This is an extremely difficult topic, and I'm simply quoting and reading from the person who wrote in my best effort to give you the truth from what I see versus what had been given to me. I had been sent off into the world from music college to believe that Wagner was a Nazi and caused it on top of everything else. Nazi didn't even exist yet. He died before Hitler was born. And he was very upset that he couldn't speak back. He had no recourse to speak up for himself without being completely destroyed in the media. He wasn't able to produce his own stuff in his country or any other. So he ran away and made one of the craziest pieces of art ever. Der Ring des Nibelungen. The Ring Cycle, which clearly inspired The Lord of the Rings and many other things. And maybe Tolkien was against saying that he was inspired by it because Wagner is just labeled as a Nazi now. And I think the main goal here, in a World War U kind of way in closing, I think the main goal perhaps was to prevent him from continuing the evolution of the art form, because he was clearly on that path. Perhaps getting closer to what music is meant to be is part of what we're meant to do, and maybe that was being pushed back and prevented to make way for the Federal Reserve, World War I, World War II. Everything's connected, all of it. It sure is something about Germany, huh? What an incredible period of time. Crazy. Crazy. Oh, I hope you enjoyed this. I am exasperated spiritually, not mentally or physically. it hurts me to even discuss this stuff. It really does, because it's such a tough topic, and it's old, and it's finger on the pulse, and it's very, very risky for me. This is risky to discuss, even though I'm just using someone else's stuff. I am at risk, and I have to be very careful about what I say about this stuff, you know. So, thank you. Thank you very much for checking me out all this time and hanging with me for this, 50 minutes. And Richard Strauss is next. So stay tuned. There's plenty more in this music miniseries, and who knows what else is coming with this show. Like, subscribe, share. Find me on Patreon. Find me on Substack. I'll see you soon. Thank you.